Hello and welcome to Reality Check. You're watching a special broadcast as we have an exclusive with Dr. Anthony Fauci, who is the advisor to US President Biden, the medical advisor to US President Biden, and who's emerged as one of the most influential voices on the global pandemic. Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Fauci, for speaking to us. Let me just begin by asking you a big picture question as to when you look at the world and you look at India and the US and the curve of the virus, what are you seeing? What gives you hope and what worries you?
Well, in America, things are going extremely well after a very difficult time we had last fall and winter. The number of cases are going down considerably. We went from a daily average of about 60,000 a day to now well below 20,000 a day. The good news is that we are doing very well with the implementation of vaccines. About 52% of our adult population is fully vaccinated, and about 64% of our adult population has received at least one dose of a two-dose regimen. The rest of the world, it really depends on what country you're talking about. Some countries are doing well. I mean, the UK is now facing a problem with the 617 Delta variant, the variant that is dominant in India. That is becoming the dominant variant in the UK. So even though they've done very well with their vaccine program, they are concerned about the reemergence of the variant 617. India had gotten hit very badly, as you well know, but the cases are starting to come down, at least in certain states. So it really is a mixed bag. Some countries are doing well. Some countries, for example, several countries in South America are having a real difficulty. The most important thing for everyone is to get as many vaccines into people's arms as quickly as you possibly can. And that's the thing that's going to ultimately contain the outbreak. It's going to be vaccination. So we've got to get people all over the world vaccinated. President Biden yesterday at the G7 announced that the United States will be giving to other low and middle income countries 500 million doses of vaccines, which is the largest donation of vaccines literally in history.
Now, I know that you and President Biden have both flagged that the Delta variant, which you refer to, one of the variants which originated in India, is also now present in the US. I think there was a 6% trace that you found. How worried are you about it, and what exactly are you seeing in terms of its infectivity?
Right. The problem is that the Delta variant that has been rather dominant in many states in India is one that spreads much more readily and much more efficiently from person to person. So any country that has the 617 Delta variant should be concerned that there will be a surge of infections, particularly if that particular country does not have a substantial proportion of their people vaccinated. Because we've seen that when 617 spreads among non-vaccinated people, it can become dominant very, very quickly. That's exactly what's going on in the UK, that the Delta variant is taking over. It is close to 90% dominant right now. In the United States, it's only 6%, which is the reason why I have been pushing very hard to get people vaccinated as quickly as we possibly can.
And in terms of the, the effectiveness, Dr. Fauci, of the existing vaccines against the virus and the emerging variants, what exactly are we seeing about that? Are these vaccines effective?
Fortunately, the vaccines that are being used in the United States and in many other countries do reasonably well. The vaccines do quite well against the Alpha variant, the 117, a slight, moderate diminution in efficacy against 617, but not so much that you need to worry about it. So, for example, the mRNA vaccines are about 88 to 90% effective against the 617, and about 100% effective against severe disease from them. So those vaccines seem to be doing reasonably well. Not as well as against the alpha, but still well enough to protect most of the population.
Are you in touch at all with the scientific community here in India, with the government, about the Delta variant?
You know, I have been in discussion with the ambassador from India to the United States, who will be putting me into contact with some of your scientists. We have had Zoom interactions and discussions with a number of scientists already. We have very good relationships scientifically with our Indian colleague scientists. So I hope as we go further, we'll be able to get even more close in our interactions.
Do you think, Dr. Fauci, that India could have done a better job of containing the virus?
You know, I think it's very difficult to be critical of how a particular country does. I mean, you could always look back and say you could have done better, but I think it's not productive to be pointing fingers and said a country or a particular region should or could have done better. I think this is a very, very difficult virus, and it has been a real problem for virtually every country in the world. So I would not be inclined to point any blame or to criticize in any way, particularly India, who's had a very difficult problem.
Right.
But remember, the United States has had a very difficult problem. We have 590,000 deaths in the United States.
Yes. Okay, fair enough. Dr. Fauci, wanted to ask you, what is your take on the possibility of a third wave? Much has been said about whether particularly in India, as we come off our second wave, the possibility of a third wave looms large. How worrisome or serious is that possibility? And obviously it's linked to vaccinations as well.
Well, it is totally linked to vaccination. And that's the thing where I said in the beginning earlier of our interview just a few moments ago, it is absolutely critical to get as many people vaccinated as you possibly can. Because if you have a country in which a relatively small proportion of the population are vaccinated, you are vulnerable to successive waves. We've seen that in the United States. We've had 3 major waves in the United States. The last one was the most serious, when we were up to 300,000 cases a day and over 3,000 deaths per day. There was a period of time in the late fall and early winter of 2020, 2021, when we were doing very badly. Now that we have vaccines, we've been able to turn that around. So my advice would be do whatever you possibly can to get as many people vaccinated as possible.
Right. One of the questions I wanted to ask you, Dr. Fauci, is that you've been getting some heat from some quarters about this whole question about whether the virus was a lab leak from a Wuhan lab or a species jump. Would you just like to set the record straight on that?
I think we need to keep an open mind. Most scientists, not only in the United States, but worldwide, feel that the most likely origin is from a natural animal host that jumped species, just the way SARS-CoV-1 did, just the way MERS did. But you must keep an open mind about the possibility that there may have been a lab leak. But from the standpoint of what most qualified scientists believe, they believe that the likelihood is much stronger that it was a natural evolution of an infection.
Right. Because a lab leak would suggest that China deliberately engineered something to actually kill a bunch of people, including their own people.
Yes, that doesn't make much sense, does it?
No, that's true. I guess that's why the skepticism over that theory. But I just wanted to ask you in conclusion, Dr. Fauci, when you talk of vaccination, is it important for people, even if they've got the virus, or if they've been infected with the virus and recovered, should they still be getting vaccinated, number one? And number two, what's the guidance on the ideal time between dosages? Because here in India, we've been getting a lot of differing guidances.
Yeah.
The time has been expanded from 6 to 8 weeks. It's now gone up to almost 12 to 16 weeks.
Yeah. Well, the first question is, our Centers for Disease Control and Prevention recommends that even though you have been infected, you should still get vaccinated because vaccines induce a very powerful immune response. And we're still not completely certain as to the durability of protection after natural infection. So that's really very important. The ideal interval between doses for the mRNA should be 3 weeks for the Pfizer and 4 weeks for the Moderna. One of the problems with extending the duration is that you become vulnerable to the variants. And we've seen that in the UK, where they have extended the duration, the interval between the first and the second dose, that in that period of time, you can become vulnerable to variants. So we recommend staying on schedule. However, if you have a very, very small supply of vaccine, it may be necessary to extend it a bit.
Okay. I don't know if I have time for a final question.
We got to go.
But if I do, you got to go? Okay.
Yes,
all right.
Unfortunately.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay. Dr. Fauci, thank you very much indeed for talking to us. Pleasure to have you on.
My pleasure. Good to be with you.
Thank you. All right, Dr. Stephen Fauci there. Let me just go to panel. We have with us Shobhana Kamineni, Executive Vice Chairman, Apollo Hospitals Group. Dr. K. Srinath Reddy is here with us, President, Public Health Foundation of India. Professor Sanjeev Krishna, Professor of Molecular Parasitology and Medicine at the St. George University of London. Thank you all so much for being there. Let me just get Dr. Srinath Reddy to just give us, Dr. Reddy, your first take on everything that you heard Dr. Fauci said. Is there something in particular that jumped out to you and was of interest?
Well, I caught only the second part of the conversation, but my impression is that Dr. Fauci has very clearly given a message that people who have had COVID infection too must get vaccinated, because natural infection may have a very variable dose of viral exposure, and therefore the strength and duration of the immune response is going to be very variable. Whereas with a standardized dose in a vaccine, and that too with a priming dose and a booster dose, the strength and duration of the immune response is likely to be much more. He has also cautioned against excessively lengthening the interval between the two doses, because that makes the people vulnerable to infections, especially to that of variants like the Delta variant.
Right. Yes, of course, he did mention that. But the other thing also, Shobhana Kamineni, which Dr. Fauci mentioned and which is becoming a kind of concern globally, is about the Delta variant, which, as he said, has now become the dominant variant in England. It's picking up some traction in America as well. And that is something that we are still grappling with, is it not, in terms of how to be able to best contain it?
I caught a bit of Dr. Fauci's interview, and he actually said vaccination is the only way. And I think that in India, we have seen that that all the vaccines available for us here actually will mitigate the effects of any of the variants, especially the Delta. So you can get it, it's so transmissible, but the impact of it won't be as bad as if we were not vaccinated. So I think that's the main comfort that not only India but the world will take. And who knows, it will keep mutating. So this is what we have now, and we do have an answer and a solution to it.
Right. Professor Krishna, Your take on that? Because, I mean, you're joining us from London where, you know, the Delta variant is on the rise. What are you hearing and seeing about these concerns which Dr. Fauci raised as well about whether the existing vaccines are able to contain it?
Well, it's always hard to disagree with Dr. Fauci on the science. And I would strongly endorse, in fact, you may remember that some months ago we were saying that you really must give a full vaccination dosage according to the prescribed schedules and not to delay the second dose. And that is what is now happening here also, is that the second dose delay is now being shortened so that we're trying to get maximum immunity as soon as possible. And ideally, that has to be the right way to address any infection, whatever the nature of the variant. What you want is maximum immunity, and you want it as quickly as possible. And so, you know, this initiative, and we mustn't also forget that, you know, some of these vaccines do have different levels of efficacy. And what we're talking about in America and in Israel, for example, and in many cases now here in this country, is the mRNA vaccines, which give excellent immune responses. And the latest evidence suggests that from our in vitro studies in the lab, that in fact they still work against the Delta variant.
Right. But you know, one of the things, Dr. Reddy, that is of course central to this entire question of vaccination, and that obviously it's self-evident, the faster you vaccinate, the more you can protect yourself against future waves, is this whole shortage of vaccines that we're grappling with here in India. And one of the things, of course, I didn't get time to ask Dr. Fauci was that, you know, countries like America have booked almost 2 to 3 times the size of their population of vaccine dosage. And so there's this huge asymmetry right now, globally.
Yes, indeed, that's a major problem. But we must recognize that the prime benefit that we are going to get from vaccine at this point in time is to protect the most vulnerable people and also protect the people who are most essential for keeping society going by way of their work. Over a period of time, if large number of people are vaccinated, we'll also see an impact on transmission of the virus. But when we have vaccines in short supply, we should stick to the plan of protecting the vulnerable people as the highest priority, and then continue to follow the other public health measures like masking whenever outdoor, avoiding ill-ventilated places, and certainly ensuring that super spreader events do not take place. Those are the kind of precautions that have actually proved beneficial even in the UK. And therefore, we must recognize that we must continue our commitment to those even as we try to ramp up our vaccination through increased production of domestic vaccines and possibly acquisition at a faster pace of international vaccines.
Okay. But also, you know, Shobhana Kamineni, it was good to hear Dr. Fauci saying that his office is reaching out to India and is trying to connect with Indian scientists and experts here to try and sort of, you know, strategize on how to fight some of these variants.
I think that that's been the case right from, you know, it started. India's always been open, and the whole thing about how, you know, detecting it, being transparent with information, and all over the world, I think even just getting the vaccine up within a year, it's not just Dr. Fauci, it's just everyone in the world has been so cooperative to fight this. So I would think that that you know there's a global will to just put this behind us. And one thing, Vasu, the cases are coming down, and actually let's put the past of the fact that, you know, we got into a bit of snafu with the vaccine. I think by July, and and definitely by August, there'll be as many vaccines as we can give. That is the time that I want people to remember that you still have to get vaccinated. The importance, and they shouldn't forget the pain of this wave and say, acha, ho gaya.
Yes.
We should continue and keep it going. I think the last 20% of vaccinating them is going to be super tough and super critical, because they could transmit all over again and bring all these new variants.
No, that's very important, because you don't want to be in a position where there's this constant disconnect between demand and supply. When we had more vaccines, not enough people opting in, and then you have a huge spike of interest, and then suddenly the vaccines run out. So let's hope that that is sustained. But last quick comment from you, Professor Krishna, that obviously, this vaccine asymmetry that we're seeing across the world, it's really important that gets resolved, because, if India or other countries don't get their act together, then everyone's at risk.
Yeah, the way I look at it is that, in a village, when a house is burning, you first have to put the fire out in your house before you can help your neighbors. But it's essential to help your neighbors, because their fire may come back and light your own fire. And what COVID has done, it has made us all in the globe into a village. And we must always now behave as though we are one village. And the vaccine sharing must happen very quickly and effectively for this reason. Not just to help our neighbors, which is always first, but also in the end to protect ourselves.
Sure. No, that's really important. But anyway, it was great to have all of you on, and have Dr. Fauci as well. Thank you so much for joining us. That's all the time we have on the show. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you.